Hey, we'd like to welcome you to the inaugural premiere, initial, first, beginning episode of SteeleWatching. We are your hosts. My name is Eric.
And I'm Sara McNeil.
And glad to have you here. We probably don't know you. You probably don't know us, or you may not know me. You probably know Sara, but you probably don't know me. So let's real quick do a couple of introductions beyond just our name. I am an original Steele fan. I watched it during its initial run back in the 80s. I loved the show. I was always a fan of detective shows. I don't remember how I learned about it, but when I heard about it, it was definitely something I wanted to watch. And eventually, after I met my now wife, Remington Steele became our date night TV show. So it's got a special place in my heart, if for no other reason than for that. So now you know me.
So I am not an original fan, or at least not in any way that could be considered. I never watched the show because I was born the same year that the show began. So I didn't watch it in its original. Yeah, I could have watched it as an infant. But I did come to it through late night TV reruns when I was a teenager. So I was, flicking through channels back when you still flick through channels. And I came across it in season 5, no less. And started watching it because it seemed kind of, I know, it seemed kind of romancing the Stony. And so I was like, cool, okay, Pierce Brosnan, he's kind of cute. I'll watch this. And then I found the Steele Watchers mailing list. It was not a Facebook group at that time. It was a mailing list, and got involved. And since the late night TV channel that was playing the show only had the rights to seasons 3 through 5, I didn't see the first 2 seasons for years. So fans were kind enough to mail me VHS tapes. This was in the 90s, so VHS tapes, and I caught up on episodes, and that's kind of how it happened for me. But yeah, definitely not in its original run.
All right. Well, now that we've got some introductions made and you know a little bit about us, let's go ahead and get into the episode. The first episode is, surprisingly enough, the premiere episode for the series, called License to Steal. It was first aired on October 1st, 1982. It was written by Michael Gleason, although IMDb also lists Robert Butler as a co-writer, but it was directed by Robert Butler. And if you are new to Remington Steele and have just tripped over this podcast, or somebody recommended it to you, and you are going to listen to the podcast as we go through the episodes, I'm going to go ahead and give a summary. In the premiere episode, private investigator Laura Holt of Remington Steele Investigations is in charge of security for an event in which some of the rarest gems in the world will be on display. What the client doesn't know is that the head of the agency doesn't exist. He's merely a fiction created by Laura Holt. And what Laura doesn't know is that a thief is about to assume the role of the non-existent detective, throwing her life into chaos, threatening both the security of the gems and the integrity of the agency. Boom, boom, boom. So let's talk real quick about the title sequence.
Sure.
In my experience, it's unique in a couple of different ways. First of all, the fact that it has a voiceover narration, not very common on TV shows. I can only think of a handful. Yeah. And I'll bet you most of the ones that you can think of are science fiction shows.
Highlander, Babylon 5. Yep.
Space 1999, Star Trek, the original, and Next Generation. Yeah. So they were all science fiction shows. And even though the lead actors in several of those, principally the Star Trek shows, did the voice narration, they kind of did it as a disembodied third party. Space, the final frontier. He wasn't really doing it as Captain Kirk. Patrick Stewart was not really doing it.
With the exception of Highlander, the series, it was the character.
But most of them didn't. And so that that makes this, even among the unique shows that had the voice narration, it makes it somewhat unique because there aren't many of the shows that had the narration that were done by the character.
No, there weren't.
And the thing about this is that unlike the Star Treks, which gave you a little bit of a setup, but really didn't give you anything substantial, this introduction, 43, 45 seconds long, could have been an episode.
Oh, yeah.
Because it is so tightly written and so concise and has so much information packed in there that there's a lot of details that we learned through the series that fills out the story, but we know the whole story of Laura Holt and Remington Steele Investigations. All the important bones of the story are there.
Yep. I would even say I would have liked to have seen that episode. I would have liked to have seen like an episode or two prior to his showing up where they're, kind of flailing around doing their thing.
Yeah. And according to Michael Gleason, was it Michael Gleason that was saying that, or was it Robert Butler? That was kind of the original premise, that Remington Steele didn't exist. They were just running this agency with this fake boss and pulling their con, I guess you could say, on their clients.
Yeah.
But of course, then they decided, well, what if he actually showed up and drove them crazy? So that's a great introduction. My question is, it's a great premise for a TV show. How smart is it in real life?
Oh, I think there's so many holes in it in real life.
Now, I do know of at least one situation where I knew somebody who worked for a company where it was kind of that way. The owner of the company invented fake owners, but I don't think it's a smart idea.
Well, like this is jumping ahead, but later on when they get in trouble for not filing a tax return, you're either A, committing tax fraud, or B, tax evasion. Like there's only two ways that goes for that. And then that's pretty iffy.
The only way I could see that they could even get away with that would be prior to Harry showing up and assuming the role.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Because as long as there wasn't an actual body there was no paperwork or documentation that represented a real life person.
But he does show up.
But then he does show up. Things just go sideways real quick.
And now you've got a face and a name, and you've got no backstory at all. And you've got, people wondering, okay, now you got to pay some bills, right? He's never had to do that. He just kind of pops from one place to another and doesn't bother to establish roots. So.
Okay. So I love that introduction. It's great. It's also a one-off because after this episode, it changes.
It does. Yep.
But we'll talk about that later. The practice run, where they start by bringing the gems out in the metal box from the helicopter, and the guards carry it off in the box and bring it over to the hotel, and they meet Hunter, and of course Murphy is actually bringing it in a linen cart. What do you think of that plan?
I think it's one of those plans that is very simple and theoretically could work. But I don't know if I were Hunter, I don't know how comfortable I'd feel with it, because a man like Hunter, I think, wants bells and whistles, wants tech, wants like state of the art protection. I don't think a man like Hunter, and you can see it when he voices his discomfort with the plan. Like okay, a linen cart, like this is, he doesn't think it's going to work. I don't think.
Well, I think the idea of the deception is a good idea. I'm not sure I would go for the idea of the guy who's got the actual jewels, in this case Murphy, not being armed in some way. I mean, and we can presume that he's not, because later on in the episode, Laura comes back into the office and they're looking for the agency gun. The agency has a gun.
Yeah, because she wants to pack a rod.
Yeah. So obviously Murphy was not armed. So I have a problem with that from that standpoint. I also have a problem with them doing a practice run with Murphy.
Yeah.
Maybe use somebody else. Because let's face it, if you're going to
because if anyone's surveilling them,
exactly,
they're going to see
exactly. And actually that comes up in the episode a little bit later on when Harry, I'm going to call him Harry just for the sake of this, at least this episode, because
we'll call him Harry.
In this episode, he has at least two names, both of which we know are assumed.
Yeah.
So that comes up later when he's in the dark room. But it seems to me that if you're going to do something like that, you don't want to reveal your plan too much. And by going through the practice with Murphy, with the linen cart, it seems to me they're revealing a little bit more than maybe they want to.
Well, and they are being watched, right? So as we pointed out, that way he knows exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not the best. It's just not the best.
I mean, it's a good idea. I just think it was kind of poorly executed.
Yeah.
And then I've also got a problem with the conversation between Laura and Hunter when she says that the art of security is a lot like a magic act. It's built on deception. No. Deception may be an element of security, but usually isn't
right.
The whole principle of security built on the concept of security. I mean, you make something secure. You lock it down. Yeah. you make it so that you've created obstacles and deterrents from somebody who might want to break in.
Put an alarm on it. They could have put an alarm on the box.
Yeah, so there's an element of deception in security, but that's not the principal element of security. So I just wonder what her thinking was there.
I think this shows us two things about Laura, something that are really fundamental to her character, that she is a con artist. We see him as the con artist throughout the entire series, but the first two things that she does is A, we're told via her monologue that she's faked a boss that doesn't exist. And then B, we're shown this first case that they're working where they're, like you said, they're not using, quote, traditional security. They're using deception. They're using a con. This is how she thinks. She is a con artist.
And I had never thought of that until you had mentioned it in some of our previous conversations, but you're absolutely right. She is a con artist. I'm not sure she thinks of herself that way, but
no, she doesn't, for sure.
Yeah, but practically speaking, she is. Now, after they do the fake delivery with Hunter, the practice run, and Hunter says, I want Steele in there in the trenches. Murphy, I think Murphy's supposed to run interference for Laura. I'm wondering if that's not part of his function, that he knows that she has a tendency to want to bow to the whim or the will of the client. So in this case, when Hunter says, I want Steele there, she says, well, Mr. Steele will be calling in. We'll discuss it with him and see how he wants to do it. And Murphy's tried to block that by saying, we'll submit a bill for our services to date. And then when Laura does say that about the phone call, if you look at Murphy's face, he's kind of like, seriously, you're gonna go that way?
Now?
Yeah. I sometimes wonder if Murphy's role, at least up to this point, wasn't to just try and keep her on the straight and narrow.
And this is, again, I think, something that's revealed later. She has a tendency to think compulsively. She has a tendency to maybe not always think things through, i.e. creating a fake boss. And then she has a tendency to, I don't know if it's bowing to the whim of the client. I think it's more that she's determined to get this, this recognition, and this, this case is really going to provide a lot of money for the agency. And so she's determined to do whatever it takes, because we get the impression that in the past, she has had no problem saying like, okay, yeah, sure, we're out. But in this case, there's a lot of money on the line for the agency, and the agency's getting press recognition. And she is the kind of person who is, I think, bound, bent, and determined to see her efforts recognized. And so when she says that, I think that shock on Murphy's face is part of the, wait, this is not the plan. This is not what we discussed. But I do think you're right that he's kind of meant to kind of hold her in check a little bit, like keep her from going off the rails.
Yeah. And we'll get into the recognition thing here a little bit later, because there is a spot where it's very pertinent to the conversation. But back to the point of her wanting to try and fake the presence of Remington Steele there.
Yeah.
In the office with her and Murphy and Bernice, Murphy reminds her that they had made the decision or they had made a rule, as he says, that if a client insists on dealing directly with Remington Steele, we pass. And it's the wording of that has made me curious, and there's a lot of stuff that I missed on the previous rewatches because I wasn't watching it for critical detail thinking. But this last time when I was watching it for this episode, I caught that. And he said, we made a rule, not you made a rule.
Yeah.
Obviously, Murphy and Bernice were with her from the beginning, so they know the con, they know the setup.
Yeah.
And even though she, I guess, technically owns the agency, it makes me wonder what his position is within the agency, because that's not an employee's comment. It's the language of somebody who has some sort of interest in the company beyond employee. What do you pick up from that? Do you think he's like a co-owner, or was he brought on specifically to act as kind of the guardrails for Laura, and so she's vested some authority into him for that, or what?
So we're never given that information as to how that happened. I've thought a bit about it though, because he says, you're right, we made a rule. And I often thought to myself when I watched it, when I finally got a chance to see the first 2 seasons, I thought, well, if they needed a male face, why not just use Murphy's? Why not have him pretend to be the boss and have her just be, but then I realized that Laura's not the kind of person who initially would have wanted that. She would have wanted to be calling the shots and running the show. And so I wonder if Murphy, he doesn't feel comfortable with this setup. You can see it from the get-go. The fact that there's a rule in place that says, like, if anyone wants to meet this guy, we pass, suggests that Murphy is the one who's not a fan of the con. He didn't I get the impression he doesn't like that. So they came up through Havenhurst together.
Which we find out in a later episode.
We know that Murphy has a thing for Laura. It's very clear when Ben Pearson shows up that Murphy's not too keen on her with another guy, so we get the impression he's into her. And I wonder if after her own agency failed, she maybe vented to Murphy, or there was maybe like a drinking session where she said, you know what, we should just start an agency together. I've still got I've got some money left. And then he was like, yeah, okay. I think he might have just agreed because he wanted to, be by her side. And then of course it snowballed. And maybe he was the one that said, okay. We need to set some ground rules here because this is getting out of hand. So I sort of wonder if she clearly owns it, but I think they see themselves as partners at the moment, which is where Steele kind of throws things off course, because if she's technically the owner, she is technically the boss at the end of the day.
And another thing in that conversation is that she says, the reason I invented Remington Steele to begin with was to attract clients like Hunter.
Yep.
Wait a minute. Let's go back to the introduction. I thought the reason she created Remington Steele was because a female private investigator seemed so feminine. Okay, so we're already starting to see cracks. We're already starting to see contradictions in her motivations here. And I don't know, maybe I'm reading more into that particular
what name sounds more exciting? Laura Holt or Remington Steele?
Yeah.
The second sounds like an action hero. So if you're going to invent a male boss, make him cool.
Yeah. But is it to attract the clients, or is it to create this image? I don't know. It just seemed like a contradiction to me that she's starting to show signs of mixed motivations, which maybe she's not even admitting to herself. I don't know.
I think maybe it might be both, because if you think about it, she could have easily just called it, Michaels and Holt Investigations. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
Like they could have made a partnership and just used their last names.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Murphy could have been the face of it, but yeah, she seems to want to have this recognition. During the conversation, when Harry shows up and is pretending to be Murphy, not Murphy.
Ben Pearson, yeah.
Yeah. She seems to be a little bit too willing to discuss the case. So, again, I got to come back to the idea that Murphy is kind of the guardrails for her. He's the one who says, let's check him out. She doesn't. She just falls for it, hook, line, and sinker.
I also wonder if that's the first time she's found herself genuinely infatuated, right? Like, cause he walks in, he turns on the charm. He's got Miss Wolf, Bernice eating out of his hand. He's very calculated in what he does. He knows that she's not a secretary. He's seen her already. but he sort of pokes at her to see how she'll react.
But as Ben Pearson, he has to pretend that he doesn't know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, he's definitely pouring on the charm, and Bernice definitely, go get a cold shower, girl.
Get some hot water.
Yeah. I mean, she is so obvious, isn't she? Now, have you ever done any research into Royal Lavulite?
I haven't. I think I did a long time ago, and I do not remember is it real? Is it a real thing?
Yes.
It's real, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did a little research on it, so I'm going to throw this out
fun.
at you here, just as kind of a piece of interesting trivia for everybody. It's known to mineralogists as sugilite. It's also called purple turquoise.
Oh, that doesn't sound
Lavulite, Royal Azelle, Royal Lazelle, Wesselite, Cybele, I probably mispronounced that, which is supposedly some sort of reference to the myth of Cybele and Attis and its connection to the flower violet. It's a translucent purple stone. It was originally discovered in 1944 on Iwagi Islet in southwestern Japan by Japanese petrologist Kenichi Tsuji. And the first known sugilites were tiny yellow crystals and had no gem value. Although that yellow crystal version of it is found in places such as Mont Saint Hilaire, Quebec, and like Juria and Tuscany in Italy, New South Wales in Australia, and Madhya Pradesh in India. And of course, Northern Cape Province of South Africa, which is where the purple stuff comes from.
Right.
That was discovered in 1975 during a core drill sample from a manganese mine near Hotazel, South Africa, which revealed this thin seam of sugilite. It had enough magnesium content in it that it was the deep purple color that is referenced in the show.
Right.
It's a small but significant deposit that became the first source of gem quality sugilite and launched the gem's now famous association with purple. It was officially classified as a rare gem in October of 1980, so just a few years before the show.
Yeah.
Prices quickly climbed to as much as $1,000 a carat, compared to $3,000 or $5,000 a carat for the finest commercial grade diamonds. And there's a guy in Phoenix, a jeweler named Randy Polk, who saw the original gems that had been brought into the U.S., reportedly smuggled out of the workers' lunch pails, and then those samples made their way to the U.S. Polk saw them and went to South Africa. He traveled from house to house, negotiating with miners to buy the stones, and he now owns 100 or nearly 100 pounds of the stuff, which is estimated to be roughly half the world's supply.
Wow.
So he's got kind of a corner on that market.
I did not know all of that.
I didn't either.
I knew it was real. That's all I knew.
Yeah.
Had me on that one.
I know that Michael Gleason had commented that it was a real stone, but I didn't know anything about it until I did that research on it. Moving on from Laura and Murphy and Bernice and Harry, a.k.a. Ben Pearson, he meets his new partners at the hotel. I got a question, and maybe you have an answer for this that I missed. You know, they're having their little fight in the hotel room, and he gets knocked down, and he gets up, and Harry suggests, well, maybe it's time we join forces. My question is, why did they jump at that? What did he have to offer them at that point that would induce them to take him on as kind of a partner? Because up to this point, he kept getting in their way. And at this point, he was not Remington Steele. He didn't know any of the details of how the gems were going to be brought into the event. He didn't know anything about the security. What would have motivated them to take him on and not just kill him right there as Neef wanted to?
I honestly a couple of bad guesses, I guess, because again, this is not really well thought out, but if for whatever reason they had seen him make contact with Laura, we get no impression that they know anything about that. The only other bad guess is that Neef is not the sharpest crayon in the box. So
I'm not even sure he knows where the box is.
yeah, exactly. Neither of them seem to be all that smart. So maybe when he says like we should join forces, they just think that maybe he has something that is of value, because they don't really seem like the type that would want to do a lot of work.
That's true.
So
That's true.
I don't know, but yeah, it's not clear. There's not a lot of real motivation there beyond stupidity.
Yeah. Then they could get rid of him later and just keep his split.
I mean, also like they're gonna have to kill him, right?
Eventually,
so if there's some way to do it, I guess without committing murder and potentially like getting them in more trouble with the law, I guess maybe that would be an attractive prospect.
Yeah, or at least wait until after they get the jewels, because then it wouldn't introduce an additional complication into their efforts. So, okay, it makes sense. After Hunter and Laura have their little conversation in the event area about having your talents recognized and your efforts applauded, we see Harry in a dark room. And this comes back to our conversation earlier about how it's probably not a good idea to go through the entire fake delivery on a practice run, because and I have to be careful how I say this, because I don't want it to come off as negative toward the production crew. So I'll just say that Harry may not have been paying attention to what he was doing real closely when he was developing those photos, because when he's in the dark room developing the prints of the photos he took, he's running a couple of photos through the wash, and he pulls one out of the tray and he spots a photo of Murphy with the laundry cart. But if you look behind him, there's an enlargement.
It's the same one.
Of that same section of the photo hanging to dry. So he's already printed a copy of it. So,
I mean, remember though, back when you had to print copies of pictures, when you couldn't you take a picture with your phone and you already have it. Maybe he just thought he took a different photo. I don't know. I'm reaching here.
Yeah. I just find that humorous that the photo he looks at that reveals to him that Murphy is somehow involved in this security system is the same photo that's hanging up,
which he saw with his eyes.
Yes. And it's the same photo he's got hanging up drying, because he's already gone through the printing process. Anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, and I also think it might have been funny. This is just something that popped into my head, but it might have been funny. Like, I don't know if they had those like develop your photos in an hour or it's free sort of thing. At that time, like it'd be funny to see a scene with him, like going into, I don't know, a drugstore and being like, "Hi, I'd like to develop these photos, please." And then they're all the same shots. That's when he gets them back.
I don't remember.
Yeah, a cute little comedy bit.
I don't remember anybody promising 1 hour developing or it's free. But yeah, I certainly remember the little quickie develop things. In the restaurant scene where Harry / Ben Pearson meets Laura. Wow. Talk about double entendres all over the place.
Racy too. Like it always sort of shocks me a little bit, because the show is not super explicit. In fact, it's moderately conservative in a lot of ways. Like they dance around, with euphemisms and things like that, but never do they get that. Like that's the most explicit I think that they get, other than Up Periscope, maybe. Which is,
and I was wondering how much of that was Harry trying to, I don't want to say provoke Laura, but just kind of to throw her off balance, or obviously he had a reason for taking that approach. It wasn't just because of his supposed ignorance of American culture, because I don't think that was truly the case. No, he knew. Yeah. So I'm wondering if that was just simply a way to get her to talk and to kind of get her to loosen up and maybe not pay close attention to what she was saying, because she did once again kind of reveal too much when she says, yeah, Murphy will play a vital role. Again, she's talking about the details of the security operation, which she probably shouldn't be doing to an outsider to begin with, and certainly not somebody who hasn't been checked out. which at this point he hadn't been. Murphy was in the process.
I have a couple theories on him at this point because he comes in, he's clearly provoking her, as you said. I think that was intentional. I think he's also like he's watched her because we see at that beginning scene where he's watching. He's clocked when he comes in that first scene. He figures out, okay, she's in charge. Like I think easily it occurs to him like to zero in on whoever's in charge. He figures out it's her, and he figures, okay, I got to use the only weapon I have, which is my charm. Right? He knows he's charming. He knows he's handsome. Women react to him. You saw it with Bernice. I'll make a pot of hot water or whatever it was.
And even Laura. Even Laura in that initial scene, she was not as obvious about it as Bernice was, but she was still. No. Yeah, she was still.
It was clear. Yeah. So he thought, okay, I'm going to play on this, and he makes a point to insert as many. Like the double entendres aren't just with the Magnum and, the aroused with curiosity comment, the tell me, how did you become a dick? Right? Like that's that word dick being used in, in television at that time. And then of course the beat where he's like, isn't that what you call a detective? And then that, okay, he's not actually talking about his, I think he was trying to throw her off. I think he was trying to charm her, but I think it was also a matter of if I get her off balance, she'll reveal something.
Yeah.
She's too smart to reveal something just on its own.
Yeah, she did. When she comments about Murphy being involved.
Yeah. Because we don't really see her slip up like that again, right? Like with other cases, she's not really, I don't know if we see as much of us. Like she really, I don't know. I guess we'll have to look for that going forward, but
I think there might be a few times, but yeah, we'll keep an eye on that for in the future. Now, during that conversation, how did you become a dick? She goes back to the whole story about how she developed as a detective. Work was rewarding, recognition was nil. Seemed that no matter how successful my efforts were, the lion's share of the credit went to the male counterparts, regardless of their contribution. Didn't she essentially just set up that same sort of scenario? The only difference being that she created it rather than somebody else created it, because as we've talked, it could have been Murphy, but she didn't want it to be Murphy. She wanted it to be this fake Remington Steele guy. But what happens when people come in and they hire the Remington Steele Investigation Agency? They expect Steele to be involved. And when the case is successfully concluded, who's going to get the credit? Mr. Steele. Laura will get an acknowledgement, but it's kind of like, are you familiar with Nero Wolfe, the Nero Wolfe mysteries?
No.
Okay. Well,
no.
Nero Wolfe is this brilliant detective, and he's got a leg man named Archie Goodwin. Goodwin is the guy that goes out, takes all the thumps, does the legwork, does the research, and he's the one who really does all of the work, but it's always Nero Wolfe who gets the credit. And Archie Goodwin's looked on as kind of a gopher, glorified gopher. And I can see that in this situation, that's largely how Laura and even Murphy would be looked on. Remington Steele solved the case. Oh, you just work for him. You do his legwork. So isn't that really the same situation that she tried to get out of?
I think maybe in her head, it's a little different because she's controlling the game. Like up until that point, when her agency failed, she was at the mercy of the game. She worked at Havenhurst. Everybody got recognized, but she tried to start her own agency, and nobody was willing to take a risk or take a chance. And so I think maybe by doing this, she sort of acknowledged, okay, the game's not going to change. It's going to be the same no matter what happens. So if I'm going to be at the mercy of this, I'm going to be in control of it. And I think maybe and again, remember, she didn't ever intend for there to be a Remington Steele. So I think maybe in her head, it felt like, okay, if they're giving all this praise, that's just a pseudonym. It's like an author who uses a different name. They're praising me, even if I appear as unnamed woman or, associate in the press. I think maybe in her head, she saw it as something that was maybe just a step up. Not perfect, obviously, but I think she didn't think she was ever going to be able to make it what she wanted.
I understand what you're saying, and I understand the motivation, but it just seems to me that it's kind of counterproductive, because if she wants to be recognized for her work, which presumably at some point she would want to, so that she could get to the point where maybe she could open an agency under her own name again. She's getting nothing out of it.
Yep.
And it's, what's that saying? It's kind of like a kid wetting their pants in a black suit. It gives you a warm feeling, but you're the only one that sees it. Something like, so she's the only one who,
I've never heard that, but that's great.
She's the only one who knows that she's getting the credit, because to the rest of the world, Remington Steele's getting the credit and she's just kind of there. So it just seems to me kind of counterproductive to her goal, especially if what she's saying in this particular scene is the case, that she's frustrated about the fact that she wasn't getting the recognition she was entitled to because of the work that she was doing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It does feel a bit like shooting herself in the foot.
Yes.
For sure. Because at the same time that she's doing it, she's creating this, like, if she and Murphy had created their own agency together again and called it Michaels and Holt or something like that, then eventually people would start to recognize that she's an equal partner and she might get her name out there. But by creating this Remington Steele character who is so almost mythological, when she comes up with this, backstory and these, whatever.
Amazing.
She's essentially dwarfed herself no matter what she does.
Yeah. Let's jump ahead to the limo ride. After Harry gives the keys to the Mercedes to Kessler and Neef and says, "Don't lose us." And then he asks Laura to use her phone because they're being followed by two ruthless murderers. Did you notice that he has amazing eyesight? He can stare right into the headlights of a car that's following them and actually read the license plate. He must,
unless he had it memorized.
He's got to have had it memorized. Yeah, because there's no way you can look past those headlights.
But you think Laura might pick up on that?
Yeah,
because looking back, if she couldn't see it, then
exactly.
So like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah, so let's just say that she was so smitten by Ben Pearson that she wasn't thinking straight. And then the whole thing about the gun. What kind of detectives keep a gun in a box wrapped in tissue paper on the top shelf of a closet, and they don't know where the bullets are to go with it? I mean, they're not even. I'm sorry. Even if you don't use a gun very often,
I wonder storing them separately was a safety thing. Like if it, they don't want to accidentally shoot themselves in the office or something.
Well, I mean, for that to happen, you would actually have to put bullets in the gun first. So even if they were stored together, it wouldn't be a huge issue. But
it's not like they're going to jump in.
But I mean, even if they don't use the gun very often, it just doesn't seem like a good idea to put it in a box wrapped in tissue paper, sitting on a shelf, and then forgetting where the bullets are. Obviously, they don't use that gun very often.
I mean, that no, and that's probably part of the show's mission statement.
And she did say that it takes more brains than brawn. So, okay.
Yeah. Like I said, it's probably part of the show's mission statement a little bit. The blood isn't real on Remington Steele, where they're trying to tell the viewers, like, okay, occasionally there's going to be gunfire, but we're not going to. This isn't like a police procedural. We're not going to see shootouts on a regular basis. They're going to be more clever and elegant about it, and it sets up that running gag because, you see throughout the series that they almost never know where that gun is. It's just, never around when you need it.
And then, of course, the follow-up to that is the conversation between Murphy and Laura about how she went joyriding with a man who could be an international jewel thief, or for all we know, a mass murderer, and how that's not like her. And his comment, well, it sounds like he got a lot for his lousy bottle of champagne. Yeah, I mean, man, is he hot? But the thing is, I think he's got a point, even ignoring his romantic interest in Laura, which, that cuts clear. Yeah. That cuts through this really, really clear that he's got this interest, and he's getting frustrated here by her interest in who they know as Ben Pearson at this point. I mean, he's got a point though, because again, Murphy is running the background check, but it hasn't come back yet.
Yep.
They really don't know who this guy is, and yet she's going out and hanging out with him, and Yeah, her judgment is definitely off in this particular case.
And we get that impression with how Murphy reacts to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not like you. We don't know much about her,
Mm-hmm.
but we're already sort of getting the impression that she's acting out of character. And I kind of think this is where I kind of have my, what if this was 2022 glasses on, where, they could have done a very quick background check, it would not have taken long. It would have taken about 30 seconds,
Yeah.
like, Google it, whatever, and they would have found out real quick that, Ben Pearson looks very different.
Yeah. And talking about her judgment being questionable in this case, a little bit later in the limo on the way to the airport, after he is introduces himself, or is presumed to be by Hunter to be Remington Steele. And then the mix up about the real Ben Pearson, Laura thinking he's pretending to be Remington Steele, that whole mess.
Yeah.
They get in the limousine and she says, "Can I count on your cooperation? You're the only one I can turn to."
Only one.
Hello, Murphy. Yeah, hasn't he been there for a while? Hasn't he been somebody that you could turn to? Hasn't he been the guy there working with you to kind of keep you from going off the rails? Obviously she is really.
Yeah, that felt a little damsel-y, and we don't really see that much from her going forward. And I think that at that point too, the writers aren't really sure. Like, pilot episodes are always a bit of a toss-up, because at that point the writers are never really sure how the chemistry is going to fold out with the actors, how the written page is going to turn into when they present it on the screen. And so I think that they maybe weren't sure of who Laura Holt was, and Stephanie has such strength and sort of like inner composure that line just comes across as really awkward when she says it.
And I'm glad you said that, because that's really kind of the feeling I had about it. But in these days, being a male person, it's, it could be offensive to somebody if I had said something like that, even though it is essentially true. So thank you for saying that, because that's exactly kind of the thing I thought too, is just, it's like, really? Seriously?
Yeah.
Now, when the gems actually arrive, after they've gone through this limousine ride and he promises her they're there, I'll take care of you. Something I noticed, and makes me wonder where Laura hired these so-called security guards. As they're walking through the hotel with the fake gems, they've got their guns out. Excuse me. What are you doing? They've got to be actors hired from some sort of B-movie set carrying fake guns, because I'm sorry, if those are real guns, Hollywood. We got a problem. You don't do that.
I mean, I don't know. Is California an open carry state? I have no idea. I'm Canadian.
Well, as security guards, if they're armed security guards, the rules are a little bit different than they would be for a regular unimportant citizen.
Right.
But regardless, just from a gun safety standpoint, you don't do that.
Oh, for sure.
That's just insane. So yeah, I wonder where she hired these guys. Obviously she didn't pay top dollar. Ooh, hate to say that, Laura, but you didn't.
I mean, they're struggling. They're having some money troubles. They get what they can. You get what you pay for. Yeah.
Back in that conversation earlier, touched on the overhead. That was definitely an issue. After they go through all these gyrations and Hunter takes Harry / Ben Pearson / Remington Steele up to his hotel room. And I guess at this point, can I call him Steele or should I call him Harry? Anyway. Yeah,
we might as well just call him Steele. He's at that point, right?
Okay. He's going through the hotel room and he's finding all these suits and the clothes and the shirts and the pants and the shoes. I think I might have said shoes again. But he's going through all this stuff, and some of it's still in the packages, with the tags on it. And the shoes obviously have never been worn. And of course,
this is my favorite scene.
And of course, he mentions this later on.
How long is he staying in that hotel?
Apparently a very long time.
He's got
20 suits?
He's got enough shirts in there.
Yeah, 20 suits, 20 shirts, 20 pair of pants.
Talk about bad money choices. He didn't need to buy that much, guys.
No.
One or two outfits. Yeah. He's not staying long.
And at least take them out of the packages. Make them look like they've been worn. Come on, guys, get with it. You're supposed to be detectives. You're supposed to know how this stuff works. I mean, if you walked in and saw this, you would come to the same conclusion that Steele did.
Anybody, it's not like he's a genius.
No. I mean,
Kessler and Neef could have figured this one out.
He is very intelligent in that he does figure it out quickly. But yeah, you're right. It wouldn't take a rocket scientist to figure this one out. So, or at least figure out that something's wrong with this hunk of cheese. It stinks.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he's able to conclude that it's all a con. And I think this is the first sign that we see of something that I've thought for a long time. And that is that he is as much a detective as Laura is.
Yep.
Maybe not a professional detective as she is, because she's the good guy. He's, apparently the bad guy in this. But in order to pull off his cons, he has to use some of the same techniques, some of the same thinking that a detective does. And this is an example of it that we see here, because obviously you walk into a hotel room and see this situation, something's wrong, but the average person might not come to the correct conclusion that quickly, but he does. So he's really a detective.
Yeah. She has the training. He's got the instincts though.
Yes.
He reads people. That's his job, is to sort of read. He has to, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because his job is to find their weakness, to exploit that weakness and get what he wants. That's why he knows, okay, she's attracted to me. I'm going to flatter her. I'm going to build on that. I'm going to use these double entendres, throw her off the scent. And with this, like, you can see the instinct already. He kicks in. He looks around. He's like, okay, there's 1 billion clothes here for a 2-night stay. Something's not right. The shoes have never been worn. The brush has never been used. The clothes are still in their packages. Like, this is, it's not very well set up, but he also clocks it pretty quick.
Yeah.
For sure.
Next, we see Hunter reveal his car. And that car. It's interesting because I initially, and for years, had not given much thought to the car. And I had just assumed that it was something that the studio automotive people had thrown together, because you could. Hollywood does that. They'll create a fake car, a la the Chevy Chase movie. What was it?
Yeah.
National Lampoon's Vacation, where they created that horrid car, that station wagon. That was, but I just assumed that this was a fake car, but it is actually
that was a real car, wasn't it?
It was a fully functional concept car created by Vector Motors in 1978 and was intended for production. It had a top speed of 242 miles an hour, which is 389 kilometers per hour.
Thank you for the Canadian.
Yeah, I was trying to do that.
Canadian conversion. That's what I'm calling it.
Yeah. Now, the W2 that we saw in the show never did make it into production, but there was a version as it developed. It became a slightly different version called the W8, and that actually did go into production. Was
it less hideous? Because that thing was...
It was a bit better looking.
I mean, they might as well have used a DeLorean for all the likelihood of it's going to make...
Well, yeah. I wonder if they'd have had a flux capacitor in it.
Might have sold better.
Yeah. No, but it
just don't go above 88.
No, but the production version did look a little bit better. It was a little less hideous. But, when you're talking about exotic cars like that, I guess the standard of beauty is different. At least
that's fair.
At least it doesn't meet my standard of beauty, but then my standards of beauty have always been a little bit different than most people's in a lot of ways. So yeah, it was a little less hideous, but the company didn't last very long. So it's all a moot point at this point.
Shocker.
Yeah. Now, after the reveal and after the other reveal of Harry as Remington Steele, and she and he have their little dance fight.
I love that fight.
She is really mad, but I'm wondering, is she mad that he lied to her or that she fell for it? Or both?
Both. Definitely both. She's not used to falling for it. And that scene where she thinks she's about to get recognized and she's about to stand up, and then he turns and which is the first time we get his movie references too, right? The look on her face when she sits back down.
Oh, daggers.
I would not want to be him at that point.
If looks could kill, as they say.
That is just pure rage.
Yeah, if she had magic eyes, he would have been fried.
Yeah.
But, what's interesting is that, to me, as I'm watching this, she's angry when he is introduced as Remington Steele. And then, of course, as he comes back to the table, as you said, she's shooting him daggers that would just tear him to pieces if they were real daggers. But then as they're going through the dance, her anger seems to dissipate somewhat until Murphy shows back up and says, look, here's the real Ben Pearson, and tells her about the courier and that he's 68, not his younger brother, as he said. Yeah. And then she gets mad again. So obviously he was able to sweet talk her a little bit, or at least that's how I view it, because she does seem to ease back on her anger until Bernice and Murphy come back in and set her straight.
I think part of it, though, too, is that she's created this Remington Steele in her head, right? And she's essentially imbued all the qualities that she would want a man to have if, for whatever reason. So when he starts giving her the speech of like, oh, this is what I think, then she, I think, is mad at him because she had started to think that Ben Pearson was living up to these ideals that she had in her head. He seemed dashing. He seemed sincere. He seemed trustworthy. He seemed all of these things that, she created Remington Steele to be, and then he's not. But then he feeds her this line about, oh, it's my brother, and I'm trying to, get revenge.
It's like Cary Grant in Charade.
Exactly. So she allows herself to give him that second chance, and oof. Doesn't turn out well.
It is very much like Charade in that respect, because he's doing what Cary Grant did to, oh, dang it. Her name just slipped out of my head.
Yep, same.
And just like in Charade, she falls for it, just starts believing the news story, and then the news story falls apart.
Yep.
And then, of course, in the room, when they're going through his belongings.
Audrey Hepburn. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. It was bugging me.
They find 5 passports, 5 different names.
Yeah.
And they reveal that those are all names of characters that Humphrey Bogart used in movies. Now, I did go through and I looked these up. Douglas Quintain.
Yep.
Stand-in, United Artists, 1937.
Oh, here we go.
Michael O'Leary. Yeah. Michael O'Leary, Dark Victory, Warner Brothers, 1939. Paul Fabrini. I know, he doesn't look like a Fabrini, does he? They Drive by Night. Warner Brothers.
He doesn't look like a Fabrini.
Warner Brothers, 1940. John Morrell, Virginia City, Warner Brothers, 1940. And then Richard, or Rick Blaine, was Casablanca, Warner Brothers, 1943.
Yeah, that one's pretty classic.
And then, of course, Laura finds the real Ben Pearson hanging in the closet like a dead mackerel. She is scared witless.
Bloodless, of course, though.
Yes, yeah.
There's no blood anywhere.
No, absolutely not. We never show the blood. Is she shocked and maybe scared because she's never seen many dead bodies, or was it just the suddenness of opening the closet door and he's hanging there from the coat hook?
I definitely think it would be both, because if you got to think that up until this point, they've done security, they might have done like a cheating spouse, they've done probably like minor cases like security installs and things like that. I can't imagine they've come up against too many murders yet. So even at Havenhurst, my guess is that they probably didn't deal with a lot of that. So it's kind of like how Murder, She Wrote. You've got this tiny little town where everybody dies and some little old lady solving the crime. Like, I don't know what property values are like where Jessica Fletcher lives, but I don't think I'd want to live there. So
yeah. I mean, she's like the Typhoid Mary of murder.
Exactly. So I got to think that up until this point, because you don't think when a murder happens to go to a private detective. Like, I don't think private detectives deal with this kind of thing on a daily basis, whereas this seems to set off a cascade of like espionage type crimes. So my guess is this was, shock and like, holy crap, I didn't expect that.
Well, and of course, obviously she's going to be upset about that whole situation. And the situation has gotten pretty messy for the agency. And then here's another point of seeming self-contradiction. Laura says that she wants the agency to bring him in, that it's the only way they can come out even. Besides, he's made the whole thing very personal. And Murphy says, well, I hope it's only the agency you're trying to protect. And she says, that's the only thing I'm interested in. Well, wait just a second. She just got done saying that it's personal. It's not just the agency that she's interested in protecting. It's personal. It's revenge. It's payback.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. She's pissed.
Oh, yes.
If I can say pissed, she's pissed.
So, yeah, she's, again, she's...
And rightly so.
Well, yeah, but again, she's kind of contradicting herself. And I don't even know if she sees it. I think Murphy does, but I don't think she does. She's really...
Oh, for sure, yeah. I don't know. She doesn't. She doesn't. Like, I don't even think she's willing to acknowledge how fascinated and infatuated she was, like, to herself. I mean, like, she says it's personal to Murphy, but I think she thinks in her head it's just because she was lied to and duped. But I think she's hurt, and that doesn't probably happen very often.
And I think Murphy's response here is kind of a ray of hope. She's mad at him. She's over her infatuation with him. Okay, maybe we can get back to normal between her and I, and maybe I've got a chance still. So, yeah, I think there was definitely a sense of relief on his part there when she had that reaction. Now, after this, Laura's back in the event arena with Hunter, and he's bemoaning the fact that they ate my food, they drank my booze, but they didn't buy my car. And then Laura says, there may be an attempt to steal the gems, and we know who the potential thief is. My question is, did Laura give him the idea of stealing the gems? If she hadn't said that, would anything have happened to those gems? But having said that, okay, they've already got a clear suspect in mind, even before the theft has happened. So if I steal them, they're not going to look for anybody else.
Yep.
I mean, here's a guy who's seeing his dreams fall apart, and he needs to recoup some money, a lot of money, presumably, having invested in building this factory to produce this car, all the publicity. He's got to have sunk a fortune into it. He needs to at least recoup that. And if he wants to put the car in production, he's going to need even more than that. The gems are a perfect answer. Did she give him the idea? Is she responsible indirectly for the theft?
I kind of wondered that too, because she and he are set up as parallels of each other. And we've already, like, the whole premise shows us that she is someone who will go to incredible lengths to get what she wants, right? So if we're seeing those two as mirrors of one another, then Hunter is the opposite. Like, what Laura's done technically isn't hurting anybody, right? And Hunter, I guess, is, he's going to do whatever he needs to do. And I think that maybe she gave him the idea because he's just sitting there, moping into his beer or whatever it is, until she shows up and says, by the way, this might happen. And we think we know. Yeah, exactly. We think we know who the thief is. And then all of a sudden, ding, there's a suspect. They can be pinned on the suspect. I can get out from under this. So yeah, I wonder.
After that, they're up in Steele's hotel room, Murphy, Laura, and Steele, and they're talking about Ben Pearson being dead. This scene is the only real scene with direct interaction between Murphy and Steele.
Well, aside from the beginning when he came in,
right,
as Ben Pearson.
But he was more of a secondary part of that conversation. Now, I think...
Yeah, he was in the background.
Yeah, I think in this conversation, though, Murphy really seems to hold his own. Granted, obviously, he's trying to protect his territory, if I can use that phrase. His territory being Laura.
That makes sense.
But he's trying to protect his territory, so he's probably more aggressive about it than he might under some other circumstances, but he definitely seems to hold his own against Steele. But Steele kind of cuts him out of the conversation and just, you don't count. You don't matter. This is between Laura and I.
No, he waves him away.
Yeah, exactly. Which
has to hurt because he's watched this guy pull the wool over Laura's eyes, and then when it comes to holding him accountable, he's like, no, this is between she and I, which implies a level of intimacy that Murphy maybe wasn't aware was there.
I think Remington looks at Murphy as just kind of a ancillary individual. He's not really part of the decision-making process because, as you said, he's sized up the fact that Laura is the head of the agency. And so Murphy just doesn't really count. So he's dismissive of him, both professionally and personally, which has gotta hurt.
Ouch.
And then, of course, after this, they set up Kessler and Neef to be arrested by the police. And again, we're back to the whole situation of Laura being overlooked because Remington Steele gets the credit from the police detective for solving the crime.
Yeah. Now there's an actual person, too. She did not expect.
Yeah. And all he really did was, he was just the bait, really, to get them up there. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it was his kind of idea to get Pearson's body into his closet, but she gets overlooked again.
I always wondered what would have happened. Like, he shows up at the end. What would have happened if he didn't? Because now there's pictures of this guy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if he had just disappeared into the night.
Yeah, that would be an ongoing problem.
Clients would come looking for, and now there's a face.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a big problem.
Yeah, especially if at some point in the future he had been implicated in other crimes. Yeah, that could be a real problem for the agency.
Yeah, and there's a wanted for, like, he can't go back to Mexico for that same reason, right? Like, there's issues in other countries where he's wanted, as you said.
But from any crimes he committed from that point forward, actually it would be a compromise to him as well, because people see him, they might recognize him as Remington Steele, and then okay, so now we know who this guy is.
And then his whatever con he's pulling is
going to fall apart. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that's why he came back. Maybe he thought, oh, well, might as well see this through. He's got a comfortable life or something.
Well, it's at this point that the show or this episode changes from a more serious show to more comedic, because it's at this point that we have the madcap golf cart race.
The chase scene.
I take it you wanted to drive.
Oh, I think this is actually kind of funny because James Bond always drives. And obviously he wasn't Bond yet, but anytime you get like a Bond chase scene, it's usually, and they play on that in actually Tomorrow Never Dies, when there's a fight over who gets to ride the motorcycle between him and Michelle Yeoh. But like, they were kind of playing on this espionage. I mean, License to Steal is a direct Bond reference, right? So when he says, I take it you wanted to drive, it's kind of like that struggle for dominance. He's supposed to be this dashing character. She's the one in charge. So they're, literally fighting over who gets to drive.
Well, and up to this point, even though it had been primarily more dramatic, there was humor in it, but it was more low key. But at this point, it became more of a kind of a, I don't know if farcical is quite the right word, but it's screwball. Yeah. Madcap.
Yeah.
But this kind of leads into a couple of questions that I wanted to discuss, and I mentioned this to you previously. Did Remington Steele change the nature of television, and specifically TV detective shows? In terms of general television, was Remington Steele the first show that could be classified as a term I hate, which is dramedy? I hate that because half of the word is derived from the word comedy. And I don't really think of these types of shows as being comedy. I think of comedy as joke, 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 punchline, joke, 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 punchline.
Yeah.
Whereas this is more about humor.
Laugh track.
Yeah, laugh track shows. Thank you. This is more about humor, and the humor that comes from not necessarily the situations, but people's realistic responses or semi-realistic responses to a situation. And I think Remington Steele, even though it isn't credited as such by many people, I think Remington Steele was the first dramedy.
I mean, I couldn't tell you if it was the first, but it was definitely the one that set the formula. Because after that, you've got all these shows that came as a response, moonlighting, pretty closely on the heels of Remington Steele. And then you've got later on shows like Castle, shows like Lucifer, shows like Bones, where you've got this same formula of a capable, somewhat no-nonsense female character who is trained in some way, shape, or form, paired with a male character who is more instinctive and has a skill set that's outside of the box, right? You've got Lucifer, who is literally the devil. You've got Castle, who's a writer who comes up with these murder plots, so he's good at figuring out who done it. And then, Bones, of course, he's technically, and that one kind of throws it off a little bit, but like, it's all the same formula. So I definitely think Remington Steele set that tone, for sure.
And all of these are a mix of drama and humor, which hadn't really been done prior to Remington Steele. And as you're saying, as far as the detective genre, prior to Remington Steele, those two things were distinct things. You had the trained investigators, and it may have been a cop show where you have several trained investigators, or it may have been a detective show like Rockford Files or Beretta or something like that, a solo loner type individual, but they were trained. And then you had the accidental detectives like Jessica Fletcher, the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, They were drawn into
Yeah.
investigations because of circumstances. They got involved in a mistaken identity case because they were mistaken for somebody, or family or friends. Somebody draws them in. But Remington Steele was the first one to combine those two things, as you say, where you've got Remington Steele, you've got Scarecrow, Mrs. King, you've got moonlighting, that's a sore subject. You've got Bones, White Collar, and all these others. And it's the merging of the trained investigator and the, not just a novice, but the novice who gets in the way.
But also at the same time brings something to the table that the, trained person doesn't necessarily have. But yeah, definitely gets in the way, right? Castle gets in the way all the time. And, same with Lucifer and.
Yeah. I think beyond the fact that Remington Steele was a great show and was the first show in the hour format, according to Michael Gleason, that brought more of a comedy vibe to an hour format show, whereas previous to that, they were all more serious. I think Remington Steele is highly underrated in terms of what it did to the industry. Of course, I don't know whether Remington Steele was really responsible for those changes or if it was simply the first one to implement some things that were already underfoot, because in terms of the time frame, Scarecrow and Mrs. King came out the following year, as I recall, which means that it was already kind of in development at the time that Remington Steele came on. So
I think they knew they were doing something different. I think because they set out to make a show that was intelligent. If you think about the way that it's done, they're relying on people knowing these old film references. They're relying on people understanding the shorthand visuals of okay, now we've gone from a Cary Grant noir to screwball comedy, and now we're coming back to, Casablanca. These tropes that are used are very distinctive and that's why he uses the old movie references, but it's in the show too. And I think that is a very sophisticated thing that hadn't been done.
Yeah, a lot of their cases were reflections of the movies that are referenced.
And it's clear, they're relying on people to know that, or at least to recognize the shell of it, which is different.
Yeah. Even if you're not familiar with the movie specifically that's being referenced.
Yeah.
I want to give credit where it's due. And if Remington Steele is responsible for these changes, I think the industry needs to
acknowledge. Yeah.
Stop giving the credit to moonlighting.
Yeah. That is a sore spot. Yeah. For sure.
Oh, yeah.
Not even as good, not anywhere near as good.
I'm different conversation. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But yeah, it's a sore subject. I guess that gets us through pretty much all the episode. Is there anything that you wanted to say about this episode or throw out there that we didn't touch on?
I think we pretty much covered it. Yeah, I think we pretty much kind of touched on all the things that, in terms of pilots, I always had this rule of thumb when it came to trying to get people that, that I knew to watch something that I liked. I very rarely showed them a pilot episode because I found the pilot episodes to shows I liked were so underdeveloped to what the show eventually became that I felt like it was doing a disservice. If I wanted my friend to like the thing that I liked, I'd show them the episode that I liked. And usually TV at that point was episodic enough that you could jump in and know the characters pretty early on. But I would show the pilot for this one because even though some of it's underdeveloped, Laura kind of acts a little wonky.
Premiere.
Yeah. I think it works really well. It sets the tone. It has, as you said, the humor. It has the intelligence. It has the pieces of the puzzle that you need. Plus, you really kind of need that background to understand the dynamic going forward. So I would show this, this is my conversion, what I call conversion episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because this episode, just like the introduction, the voiceover on the titles sets up this episode. This episode as a whole sets up the rest of the series.
Yeah.
And even though you could jump into another episode and maybe fairly quickly get the lay of the land, it would take you a little bit of time to wait a second. Wait a minute. Who is this guy? You mean he isn't who he says he is?
Why is he this?
Yeah.
He hasn't.
Yeah. And so this one really is kind of unique in the series in that it sets up everything else from it.
And the production values are incredible. I had a friend who started watching it just recently and said to me, you sure this is the 80s? Like, this is like, the production values on this are really good. Like, it's visually very, yes, it looks 80s, but it also could look 80s in 2022, when they film something that's in another time. He was very surprised at how bright and vibrant it looked and how sort of modern but also classic they had made it look, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, and the thing is that the choice of a lot of the art direction does make it somewhat timeless, even though you're conscious of the fact that it's in the 1980s. It doesn't necessarily have the look of something that is exclusive to the 1980s.
Yeah, I think that's how it feels for sure.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and close this up for the day. We have a website, SteeleWatching.com, and on the website are show notes. So if you want to go there and check out the show notes, you can do that. Also at the website, we're going to have something called Amazon Links. Amazon is a company, in case you're not aware of them, that does mail order. And yeah, like nobody's heard of them. We're going to have links for all of the movies that are referenced in this episode, not just Tea and Sympathy, but also the Humphrey Bogart movies. If you go to the website and you click on one of the links that we provide, which will take you to either the Amazon US store or a separate set of links that will be there for the Amazon Canada store, you can buy these movies, and they are affiliate links, which mean that we get a small commission anytime you buy a movie that we link to on our website. So if you want to help the podcast and at the same time get yourself some of these movies that you might not have seen, even though you've heard them referenced in the series over the years, this is a good way to do it and help us at the same time. Sara, you want to tell everybody about Steele Watchers?
Yeah, check out, we've got the Steele Watchers group, which is where we met, but also where you'll find just a ton of, it's probably, I think, one of the most active fandom Facebook groups I've ever been involved in. I've been involved in a lot. And most of the stuff in other groups is not very interactive. People don't really post anything beyond the odd ad or, whatever, but people will post really cool stuff. There's discussions. So it's worth checking out if you're, interested in getting involved in a fandom group. And we've also got links to follow the podcast that we've got a Facebook page as well, where you can follow the podcast through Steele Watching on Facebook.
The Steele Watchers group has a deep history in Remington Steele fandom because it actually evolved out of the Yahoo groups.
It's the old mailing list. Yep, that's the mailing list I mentioned.
Exactly. And there are a lot of people in that group that are OGs. They are the original old-time hardcore Remington Steele fans, prolific fan fiction authors.
I lied about my age to get onto the mailing list. Yeah, I had to be 18.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was not 18. So
you lied, didn't you?
I did. I lied. I was like 16, so I said I was 18. I wanted to read the fan fiction. So I have written a lot of it now. So, but yeah.
That's the other thing is that you are also somewhat prolific on the Facebook group, not just fiction, but you also post analysis of the episodes and various things. So yeah. So if you're not a member of the Steele Watchers group, go check it out. Sara's very active there. I am less so. I'm not really much of a social media person, but yeah, you can definitely contact Sara and follow her postings in the group there.
I'm a millennial. We have to be. It's how we communicate. I was actually a Zennial, technically. I'm in that weird little pocket generation of 1977 to 1983. So yeah, I'm a Zennial.
I don't keep up with the names. I don't know. I can't figure it all out. But that is the end of this episode. So again, check out the website, SteeleWatching.com, and come back for the next episode, which is going to be the actual pilot episode, not the premiere episode. Tempered Steel.
Sorry.
No, it's a mistake a lot of people make.
Yeah, that'll be great. Tempered Steel.
All right. Hey, we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.